I arrived at the house on a cloudless December afternoon, the weak sunlight barely managing to highlight the ornate ironwork framing the windows of the old Victorian mansion. It was my fresh start, a chance to escape the shadows of a marriage that had faded like a photograph left too long in the sun. The house stood in a quiet neighborhood in Los Angeles, its facade an elegant blend of charm and foreboding. The real estate agent had been eager to tell me of its historical value. Built in 1889 by a shipping magnate, Henry Walcott, she had explained, her voice tinged with the pride of someone revealing a secret treasure. He lived here with his family for decades. Of course, it hasn't had a permanent resident in years. Her pause after the word years had lingered, but I dismissed it as a harmless dramatic flair. The interior was everything I had dreamed of, high ceilings with intricate molding, polished wooden floors that creaked softly underfoot, and fireplaces in almost every room. A grand chandelier hung over the entrance hall, its crystals catching the dim light and scattering it into tiny fragments that danced on the walls. Yet, there was an undeniable stillness to the air, as though the house were holding its breath, waiting. My first week was a blur of unpacking and organizing. I was determined to make this place my sanctuary. Every room I set up felt like a triumph. The sitting room, with its deep velvet armchairs, became my favorite. It faced the sprawling garden, where the skeletal branches of ancient trees stretched toward the horizon. By the end of the week, I was ready for company. The idea of a Christmas dinner had come to me impulsively. It seemed fitting to invite my colleagues, all of whom had been kind during my first semester at the university. A warm gathering amidst the glow of holiday lights might help me shake off the residual melancholy. On the evening of the dinner, the house came alive. Garlands of evergreen wrapped around the staircase banister, and candles flickered on every available surface. My guests arrived in high spirits, the hum of laughter and conversation filling the once quiet halls. It was perfect, or so I thought. As the night unfolded, I noticed something peculiar. One of the clusters of candles, arranged on a side table near the library door, seemed different. While the others swayed and flickered with the occasional draft, these burned with an unwavering, almost defiant, flame. At first, I chalked it up to the placement of the table, perhaps shielded from the airflow. Yet, no matter how closely I observed, the candles in that corner remained steadfast. It wasn't until the final guest left that I allowed myself to linger by them. Their flames seemed unnaturally bright, their glow casting elongated shadows against the walls. I reached out to extinguish one, and as I did, a strange sensation rippled through me, like a thread of static electricity weaving through my fingertips. I pulled my hand back instinctively, heart quickening. The candles stood unbothered, their flames as steady as before. A shiver coursed through me, though not from the cold. I told myself I was being silly. It had been a long day, and I was exhausted. Still, as I climbed the staircase to bed, the image of those unwavering flames remained imprinted in my mind, burning as vividly as if I'd stared at the sun for too long. The house had fallen silent again, but for the first time since I'd moved in, it didn't feel entirely empty. The following morning, I avoided the library. It wasn't intentional at first. I busied myself with tidying up from the dinner, moving plates and glasses back to the kitchen, brushing pine needles from the garland off the stairs. But each time I passed the library door, a prickling sensation crept up the back of my neck. The door was ajar, the dim light within still reflecting the pale glow of those inexplicable candles. By noon, curiosity got the better of me. I stepped into the room, trying to steady my breathing. It looked as it had before, a grand yet comfortable space lined with bookshelves, their dusty spines standing as silent witnesses to the decades. The side table was still there, and the candles burned just as they had the night before, as though the hours hadn't touched them. Determined to put the matter to rest, I leaned over and blew out the nearest flame. It didn't waver. I tried again, this time with more force. Still, the flame stood stubborn, unyielding. My frustration overcame my unease, and I grabbed one of the candles by its base. The wax was warm but solid, yet the flame leapt as if I had disturbed it. The hairs on my arm rose as a sudden draft swept through the room, though I'd closed all the windows the night before. I turned sharply toward the door, but nothing was there. The fire in the hearth flickered violently, shadows stretching long and thin across the walls, like skeletal fingers reaching for the ceiling. As I placed the candle back on the table, a faint sound broke the stillness. It was a low, rhythmic tapping, like someone knocking faintly on a hollow surface. I froze, trying to place it. It came from the far end of the room, near the large bay window. My rational mind insisted it was the branches outside brushing against the glass, but the sound was deliberate, too measured to be the wind. "Hello?" The word escaped before I could stop myself, carried on a voice that barely sounded like my own. Silence. I stepped toward the window cautiously, every creak of the floorboards beneath me amplified in the quiet. The tapping continued, steady, persistent. When I reached the glass, I half expected to see a branch swaying in the wind. Instead, there was nothing but the stark, bare garden beyond. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the tapping stopped. I exhaled, a shaky laugh escaping my lips. "It's nothing," I whispered to myself. "You're tired. That's all." But as I turned back toward the room, my breath caught in my throat. The library door, which I had left wide open, was now closed. For a long moment, I stood perfectly still, my eyes fixed on the door. My mind raced with explanations. Perhaps the draft had pushed it shut, or maybe I'd closed it without realizing. But as I approached it, a faint, metallic sound stopped me in my tracks. It was coming from the chandelier in the center of the room. The delicate crystals were swaying ever so slightly, chiming softly against one another. My eyes darted to the candles. Their flames danced wildly now, casting the entire room into a chaotic play of light and shadow. The draft grew stronger, swirling around me like unseen hands. The fire in the hearth flared, and for the briefest moment, I thought I saw something, a figure, indistinct and ghostly, standing just beyond the table where the candles burned. I stumbled back, my heart pounding as the draft ceased and the room fell into an oppressive silence. The chandelier stopped swaying, the fire calmed, and the candles returned to their unnatural stillness. I fled the library, slamming the door shut behind me. That night, I sat in my bedroom with the door locked, the lights blazing. The whispers of the day replayed in my mind, every flicker of light and shadow carved into my memory. Something was wrong with this house, but I couldn't quite name it. When the clock struck midnight, I heard it again, a rhythmic tapping, this time coming from just outside my bedroom window. I didn't move at first. I stayed rooted to my bed, staring at the frosted window panes where the tapping came, sharp and deliberate. It was the kind of sound that couldn't be ignored, insistent and precise, like fingers drumming impatiently against glass. Gathering every ounce of courage, I reached for the bedside lamp and flicked it off, plunging the room into shadow. I didn't want to see my reflection in the glass. I wanted to see what was outside. Slowly, I crept toward the window, each step heavy against the muffled silence of the house. The garden below lay cloaked in frost and moonlight, a still and tranquil picture, yet I felt no peace. Shadows pooled in the hedges and beneath the barren trees, but nothing stirred. The tapping, however, continued. It came from higher up. I followed the sound, my eyes trailing upward toward the gabled roof. That was when I saw it, a figure perched precariously on the ledge just above the window. My breath froze in my throat. The shape was indistinct, but its outline was unmistakably human, crouched low, its head tilted unnaturally to one side. The moment I saw it, the tapping ceased, as though it had sensed my gaze. Then, in one fluid motion, the figure straightened and turned its head toward me. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over the edge of the bed. My hands fumbled for the light switch, but when I turned the lamp back on, the figure was gone. I told myself I had imagined it, that the night was playing tricks on my mind. But deep down, I knew better. The rest of the night passed in fitful silence, the house pressing in on me with its unseen presence. Every creak of the floorboards, every groan of the old pipes, seemed deliberate, like a voice trying to reach me. I huddled beneath the covers, waiting for daylight, but morning brought no comfort. When I descended the stairs, the house was eerily quiet. The library door was ajar again, the faint golden glow of the candles spilling into the hallway. I approached hesitantly, peering inside. The candles were burning brighter now, their light almost blinding. But it wasn't the flames that caught my attention, it was what lay on the table beneath them. A sheet of parchment, yellowed with age, had been placed at the center of the table. The edges were charred, as though it had been rescued from fire. Written across the surface in an elegant hand were the words, "Do not let the light go out." I stared at the note, my heart thundering in my chest. Who had placed it there? And why? A noise behind me made me whip around. It was the sound of footsteps, soft, deliberate, coming from the staircase. I rushed into the hallway, but there was no one there. I called out, my voice trembling. "Who's there?" No answer. I climbed the stairs, my hand trailing along the banister as I searched for the source of the sound. When I reached the landing, I saw it, a trail of melted wax droplets leading down the corridor toward the attic door. The attic. I hadn't dared venture up there since moving in. Something about the narrow staircase and the darkened loft above had unnerved me from the beginning. But now, the trail of wax beckoned, pulling me toward it like a lure. As I reached the attic door, I saw that it was slightly ajar. A faint golden light spilled out, flickering like the glow of the candles downstairs. I pushed the door open, the hinges creaking in protest, and stepped inside. The attic was cold, the air thick with the scent of old wood and dust. The light came from a single candle sitting atop a wooden crate in the center of the room. It burned steadily, casting long shadows that danced across the sloped walls. And then I saw them. Figures, dozens of them, etched into the wooden beams of the attic. They were faint, as though someone had painstakingly carved them long ago, their outlines faded and worn. Men, women, children, all frozen in time, their faces twisted in expressions of fear and anguish. The light from the candle seemed to bring them to life, their shadows flickering and shifting as though they were moving. I stumbled backward, my hand flying to my mouth to stifle a scream. That was when I heard it, a low, guttural whisper that seemed to come from all around me. "Do not let the light go out." The attic closed in around me, its low ceiling pressing like a weight on my chest. The faint whisper, the command, echoed in my ears, though it was impossible to tell if the sound came from outside or inside my head. The single candle on the crate flickered violently, as if agitated by the unseen presence of the room. I took a hesitant step forward, my shoes scuffing against the dusty wooden floor. That single movement seemed to wake the room, as if it had been holding its breath until now. The carvings on the walls caught the light in a way I hadn't noticed before. Their etched forms no longer seemed static. A chill raced down my spine as I saw the figures. They weren't merely shadows or images, they shifted, subtly at first. A woman etched into the far beam seemed to turn her face ever so slightly toward me. A child's hand, once frozen in an outstretched pose, now appeared to be reaching further, as if pleading. I wanted to leave, to run back down the stairs, and lock the attic door behind me. But something held me there, a pull, almost magnetic, as though the house itself wouldn't allow my escape. The whisper came again, louder this time, more urgent. Do not let the light go out. My eyes darted back to the candle. Its flame had diminished to a faint, flickering ember. Panic surged through me. I didn't know why the words mattered, but I felt in my bones that I couldn't disobey. I looked around wildly for something, anything, to keep the candle burning. That's when I noticed the box beneath the crate. It was old, its wood splintered and warped, and it bore the initials HB carved in a bold, deliberate hand. I dropped to my knees, yanked open the lid, and gasped. Inside were more candles, dozens of them, all pristine and untouched despite their evident age. They looked as though they had been waiting for me. My hands trembled as I reached for one, but before I could replace the dying candle, the attic shifted. The floor groaned, the air thickened, and the whisper turned into something far more chilling, a voice. You shouldn't have come here. It was deep, resonant, and closer than I cared to imagine. I spun around, the candle shaking in my grasp. No one was there. Who are you? I demanded, my voice breaking. What do you want? The answer came not in words, but in a sudden surge of motion. The carvings on the walls seemed to ripple, their etched figures moving as though alive. The woman stepped forward, her face emerging from the beam. The child followed, his form half-carved, half-ethereal. One by one, they emerged from the walls, their expressions frozen in anguish and despair. I scrambled backward, my heart pounding, until my back hit the attic wall. The candle in my hand wavered, its flame threatening to extinguish entirely. The figures moved closer, their shadowy forms bending and twisting in ways no human body could. They didn't speak, but their intentions were clear. They were reaching for the light. No, I cried, clutching the candle tightly. You can't have it. The voice returned, calm and cold. Do not let it go out. If you do, they will never leave. My mind raced, trying to piece together what I had stumbled into. The house, the carvings, the endless candles, it all pointed to a past shrouded in darkness, one I couldn't begin to comprehend. But there was no time to think. The figures closed in, their movements growing more frantic. I fumbled to light the new candle, my fingers slick with sweat. Just as the flame on the original candle sputtered its last breath, I managed to ignite the new one. The effect was immediate. The figures froze, their twisted forms recoiling from the light. The room grew still once more, but the air was heavy with a foreboding that wouldn't dissipate. I stumbled down the attic stairs, clutching the lit candle as though it were my lifeline. When I reached the hallway, I collapsed against the wall, gasping for breath. The golden light of the candles downstairs flickered in unison, as though reacting to what had just transpired. I knew then that I couldn't leave the house, not yet. Whatever this was, it wasn't finished with me. The house was no longer a home but a living entity, alive with flickering light and the weight of unseen eyes. Each candle I passed seemed to lean into me, as though observing, judging, waiting. The warmth of the holiday decorations I had painstakingly arranged now felt grotesque, mocking. Even the scent of pine and cinnamon had turned cloying, oppressive. I gripped the candle tightly, its fragile flame the only defense against the cold dread that seeped from the walls. As I entered the dining room, the long oak table, set with its festive centerpiece and gleaming silverware, seemed eerily pristine, untouched by the chaos upstairs. But the chairs, they weren't empty. Figures sat around the table. Shadows that weren't shadows, seated as if awaiting a meal. Their outlines wavered, as if caught between worlds, their heads bowed, hands clasped. The faint glow from the chandelier above cast strange, angular shapes across their faces, distorting their features. My breath caught as I recognized some of them. The woman from the attic beam was at the head of the table, her posture unnervingly rigid. Beside her, the child, now more defined, his small hands curled tightly around the armrests of his chair. The others, 3, maybe 4, were strangers to me, their faces unfamiliar, but no less unsettling. Each figure seemed carved from the very fabric of the room, as though they had always been there, waiting for me to notice. The chandelier above began to sway gently, though no draft stirred the air. A soft, almost melodic hum filled the room, growing louder with each passing second. It wasn't random, it was a song, though the melody was jagged and fragmented, like a Christmas carol played on a warped, broken instrument. I stood frozen in the doorway, the candle trembling in my grasp. My voice, when it came, was barely a whisper of courage. "What do you want from me?" The woman's head lifted, her hollow gaze meeting mine. Her lips moved, forming silent words that sent an icy shiver down my spine. I couldn't hear her, but I could feel her intent, a cold certainty that cut through my resolve. The hum turned to whispers, this time, distinct and overlapping, a chorus of voices too fractured to comprehend. The figures around the table began to move, their gestures small at first, a twitch of a hand, a turn of a head, but growing more deliberate, more purposeful. One of the figures rose from its chair, its movements impossibly fluid, as though it were not bound by bones or flesh. It reached toward the centerpiece, a cluster of evergreen sprigs, crimson berries, and a cluster of unlit candles. As its hand brushed the candles, they ignited, one by one, their flames leaping to life in an instant. The whispers grew louder, merging into a single, chilling chant, "Bring them back." "Back?" I echoed, my voice breaking. "Who? What are you talking about?" The child's figure turned to me then, his face full of sorrow so deep it felt as though it would swallow me whole. He pointed to the far end of the room, to the grand, carved mantelpiece where an old portrait hung. I had barely noticed it before, tucked into the shadows, its surface dulled by years of neglect. The woman in the portrait bore an uncanny resemblance to the figure now seated at the head of the table. Her expression in the painting was regal, but tinged with sadness. Around her stood a man, his features sharp and commanding, and 2 children, the boy I had seen in the attic and another, slightly older, with a mischievous glint in his eyes. I stepped closer, drawn against my will. Below the portrait was a plaque, its engraving faint but legible in the flickering light. The Bellamy family, 1882. The name struck like a blow to my chest. I had read it before, in a forgotten article buried in the archives. The Bellamy family had vanished one bitter Christmas Eve, their fates never uncovered. Rumors had swirled about tragedy, betrayal, and vengeance, but no one knew the truth. Before I could process the realization, the room erupted. The flames of the candles on the table surged upward, casting grotesque, dancing shadows on the walls. The figures rose from their seats, their movements more desperate, more anguished. The chant shifted, the words more distinct now, "Bring us back. Bring us back." The chandelier above groaned, its crystals trembling with a sound like grinding teeth. I staggered backward, clutching the candle tighter, its fragile flame barely holding on. "What do you mean?" I shouted, the words torn from my throat. "What do you want me to do?" The woman at the head of the table pointed directly at me, her hollow eyes boring into my soul. The whispers returned, louder and more insistent. The flames roared higher. And then, in a moment of dreadful clarity, I understood. The house wasn't just haunted, it was hungry. I stumbled back, the oppressive air of the dining room swallowing me whole. The whispers wrapped around my mind like vines, dragging me deeper into a suffocating understanding. The Bellamys were tethered here, bound to this house by some unspeakable injustice. They weren't asking for help, they were demanding it. The figures advanced, their steps soundless yet deliberate. The woman, the matriarch, led them, her spectral form more solid now, her face etched with an anguish that transcended time. She extended her hand toward me, palm up, expectant. "I don't know how to help you." My voice cracked, reverberating against the hollow silence of the room. The candle in my hand flickered, its flame guttering as if it too were at the brink of despair. The child moved closer, his translucent eyes locked on mine. In his hand, he clutched something small, something I hadn't noticed before, a brass key. He placed it on the edge of the table and stepped back, his sorrowful gaze urging me toward it. With trembling hands, I reached for the key, its cold surface biting into my skin. I turned it over, inspecting its ornate design, and a memory surfaced, an article I'd read in the city archives about a locked cellar beneath the house. The Bellamy's disappearance had been linked to that cellar, though it had remained sealed for over a century. I understood now. The answers lay below. The house guided me as I moved, the candles flickering brighter in the halls, leading me like torches along a darkened path. The whispers grew softer but more focused, a single voice threading through the cacophony, "Release us." I reached the cellar door, its heavy wood warped with age. The key slid into the lock with a dreadful finality, the mechanism groaning in protest as I turned it. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow staircase descending into blackness. The air changed as I stepped inside, thick with the weight of the past. The candlelight barely pierced the darkness, but I pressed forward, the whispers guiding me deeper. At the bottom of the stairs, I found it, a crude stone chamber, its walls streaked with soot and time. In the center, a circle of unlit candles surrounded a dusty trunk. The whispers ceased as I approached, replaced by a deafening silence that made my pulse thunder in my ears. I knelt before the trunk, its brass latch tarnished but intact. My hands hesitated, the weight of a century's worth of secrets pressing down on me. As I lifted the lid, the candle flame surged, illuminating the contents within. Letters, photographs, and a family Bible, each item radiating a palpable sorrow. Beneath them, wrapped in faded velvet, was a journal. I opened it carefully, the brittle pages cracking under my touch. The entries were written in a looping, elegant script. They told of betrayal, of a trusted servant who had poisoned the Bellamy's holiday feast, driven by envy and greed. The family had perished here, their spirits trapped by the violent injustice of their end. Tears blurred my vision as I turned the final page. The matriarch's words were scrawled in desperation, "We must forgive, but who will forgive us?" The room trembled as I placed the journal back in the trunk, the candles flaring around me. The figures appeared once more, standing in a solemn circle, their faces softened by relief. The woman stepped forward, her hand brushing my shoulder, not cold, not warm, but a sensation of release. The child smiled, his form shimmering like morning dew. One by one, they faded into the light, their presence lifting like a veil from the house. The oppressive weight was gone, replaced by an aching stillness. I ascended the stairs, the candle in my hand now steady. The house felt different, lighter, as if it had exhaled after holding its breath for far too long. As I returned to the dining room, the chandelier above twinkled faintly, its crystals catching the soft glow of the morning sun. The portrait of the Bellamy family had changed. The figures were no longer somber, but smiling, their eyes filled with a peace that hadn't been there before. I stayed through Christmas Day, lighting the candles one last time as a gesture of remembrance. The house, for all its haunted history, felt like a home again, a place where life and memory could coexist without fear. On the morning of my departure, I paused at the door, looking back at the house that had been my tormentor and my salvation. The air was still, the whispers gone, but I couldn't shake the faint warmth of gratitude that seemed to linger in the halls. As I closed the door behind me, I knew I would never return. Yet every Christmas, when I light a single candle in my window, I think of them, the Bellamys, and the fragile, flickering hope that even in darkness, light endures.